welcome to the Young Adult Collective podcast. My name is Tilly and this is Matt.
We exist to help encourage, equip, and inspire young adults to keep trusting in Jesus and making his name known both locally and globally.
Across these episodes, we'll be speaking to both friends and experts of CMS on a broad range of topics for young adults.
We hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome back, episode 3. Very exciting. Today we're talking about culture shock with COVID and with missionaries.
Yeah, we've got Christine Bird joining us. She was a missionary with her family in Nepal, so we're very excited to welcome her on the show later on. We also will be hearing from one of our sim group members and her experience as being a part of that. And later on, we'll be closing with another worship song.
Come on, it sounds like a great episode. But first, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about how life has changed.
So Matt, tell me, what has been your favourite thing about isolation?
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is sourdough.
Oh my gosh.
It's been really fun. This last couple of weeks I've been making grain sourdough, so multi-grain, sesame seeds on top.
Is that meant to be like more healthy?
It's more healthy, more delicious. It's amazing. I've made 4 loaves of bread this week.
And none with olives.
None with olives. Olives are of the devil. I'm not interested.
Matt.
I'm sorry. It's never going to happen. And then I've also been working on some other projects. I thought, what's the best accompaniment to a sourdough starter?
Soup.
Not soup.
Okay.
A wood-fired pizza oven.
Wow.
So I've been making a wood-fired pizza oven at home so that I can make sourdough wood-fired pizzas. It's the
sourdough wood-fired pizzas.
That's right. It's going to be my go-to re-entry, invite friends over, make pizzas together.
Wow. I'm very impressed.
Experience. I'll have to invite you over.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. I think another thing that I've been really enjoying has been, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, is there's just been such a great opportunity to invest in our own relationships with God. I think God's really using this experience for his goodness and for his glory in this way. I really think that I kind of noticed at the start of isolation that I was feeling a little bit distant from God. And I thought I'd kind of check myself on that. And I realized that the main reason why I was feeling distant from God was because I was really missing community and really missing church. And I think I felt really convicted in that moment. And I kind of realized that my commitment to God was almost founded on church. And
having
based
that routine
off
every Sunday.
The routine and the community. And I was really challenged by that because actually our relationships with God need to be defined by our relationships with God. Not by the enjoyment of it or the community that we're with or anything like that. So I've just been really able to seize that opportunity, I think, and just spend time investing in my actual relationship with Jesus in my own disciplines. So I think that's been a huge blessing. What about you?
Well, my answers aren't quite as spiritual as yours.
Sourdough is very spiritual, yeah.
It's the manna from heaven. Well, I think the first one that I've probably touched on before is definitely the drop of petrol prices. That excites me way too much than I'm willing to admit. But I can remember when I was about in year 3 and the dollar was cracked with petrol prices and my mum was like, oh my gosh, it's gone to $1 for a litre of petrol and now we're sitting at 78 cents. Outrageous. I couldn't imagine
Unfortunately,
anything
it's going
better.
back up again, so...
Yeah, now that supply and demand is all evening back out again. And it's always when we're like not driving that petrol prices drop. I was reading a meme and it's like giving a bold person a comb for a prize because you don't need it.
Yeah, that's right. I know I saw the petrol prices and then I filled up my car once in the last 4 weeks.
Literally $30, my whole tank. I'm good. And like that's the fancy stuff, not even the E10.
Oh, wow.
I know. So that's definitely number one. And the second one would just be rolling out of bed 3 minutes before a staff meeting at, 8:57.
It's a good way to live.
It's a great way to live. But what about the things you've been finding difficult? Your least favorite things?
Yeah. I think it goes without saying that my least favorite thing has been not being able to really see anyone. You're kind of my only friend at this point, so it's been nice to be able to...
Ride or die.
Yeah, that's right. It's been nice to be able to do this together. But I think, I've just been really missing church, really missing community and spending time with people that I love and who care for me and look after me. And it's really hard to kind of keep track of our friends and keep track of people that you care about. So that's probably been the hardest. And I mean, again, it goes without saying, but I'm so sick of Zoom.
Yes.
I'm so done.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, Tilly, what are you missing most about pre-ISO life?
Oh, it feels like that was so long ago now.
I know,
Pre-isolation. I can't even remember. That's like, what, February? Well, I actually miss going to work, like going into the office for work, because it breaks up the whole space between home life and work life. If I'm at home doing work, everything merges, and I go to the fridge way too often.
Imagine if your home office was also a bakery.
Is that your office?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as much as we have the kitchen in the staff room, I miss being able to chat with everyone and actually being there in person for meetings. I think now it's a shock when you see people in the flesh because you're so used to seeing them on a Zoom call. So I do miss being an extrovert. You get a lot of energy from seeing people and groups of people, not just one-on-one in like 1.5 meters away from each other, but, being able to hug people. I'm a hugger. Not hugging is killing me. I do not like this elbow bump business that we have to do now.
Yeah, it's weird.
But I was thinking about everything that we are facing, and although we haven't chosen to go into a different culture, the shock of it is still relevant, and we have still found ourselves in a completely different situation than we're used to. And it reminded me of when we did MIST last year, which stands for Mission Interlink Short-Term Training. And we talked about what missionaries face when they go on field and the culture shock that surrounds them from the honeymoon phase. So, we're wearing lots of active gear and get cheap petrol, and that's such a win right now. But then the frustration that we go through and the sadness of trying to cope with everything that is different, and eventually when you get out of that to finding a place of acceptance, and I guess you find peace with it and you're okay. And that's why today's segment we're talking about culture shock and how it is so relevant right now with coronavirus, and we'll be having Christine Bird to share that with us because she was the one who actually spoke about it and we were at MIST.
I think it's a really good point, Tilly, is we're just experiencing a completely different culture at this point. Relationships look different, friendships look different, the way that we spend time with people looks different. It's all different. So I think, it's a really good point. We really are in a different cultural space at this point. So I'm really excited for this episode. Christine Bird is super wise and has some really good insight. She was also a missionary, so she's experienced culture shock in different cultures around the world firsthand, which she'll talk a little bit about too. So let's get Christine on Zoom and have a little chat to her. Well, welcome, Christine. So good to have you on the Zoom today. Would you like to quickly tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, I want to thank you for inviting me. I'm very privileged to be here. I'm work for CMS Victoria as the Pastoral Care Coordinator 2 days a week, and as a mentor, lecturer and short-term training coordinator for St Andrew's Hall another couple of days a week. And my husband and myself and our 3 kids went to Nepal when they were about 8, 7 and 5. And we worked in West Nepal where my husband was a surgeon at the hospital there. I was involved in some tract ministry and teaching IT to GP trainees, and also a bit of homeschooling of my eldest daughter in the last year. Not that either of us want to repeat that, but anyway, then about 4 years ago, my husband and I went back for another 6 months we'd done a few short-term trips, but this one was a bit longer, and he did some mentoring of new surgical trainees while he was there, and I did a bit of research. So that was another good experience there.
Cool. And just quickly, what motivates you to go back so many times? What makes you passionate about mission?
Yeah. I think it's relationships with people, and also just a sense that God's asking us to do that, and good use of our gifts and talents. The fact that the hospital kept asking my husband and I to come back meant we would consider it, and if we could do it, we would do it. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Cool. So just a little earlier, Matt and I were actually talking about culture shock and the similarities we are seeing everyone experience with now the coronavirus and all the restrictions that are constantly changing.
Yeah.
From your experience being on field and everything that you teach at St. Andrew's Hall, what exactly is culture shock, and how would you define the main symptoms?
Okay. So, I mean, culture's a set of ideas and customs and behaviours, worldview that a particular people group or society have. And then the shock comes when a person from one culture finds themselves, operating in another culture. So for my husband and I, when we went to Nepal, suddenly we arrive, we're surrounded by all these tuk-tuk drivers wanting to take us, all vying for our custom, and it's very hot. There's monkeys down the end of the street. You're assailed by all these, all your senses are assailed. So there's things like smells, rubbish from the rubbish that was everywhere, and also not such nice smells, or even worse smells, the sort of poo smell of sewage and stuff like that. So just to be graphic about it. So those kinds of smells, as well as the nice smells that you'd encounter. There were things like, your stomach being unsettled by the food, and then when you had a more significant hygiene problem, when you might be rather overly familiar with the toilet for a while. All those things are quite confronting. Although, and I think that one writer talked about a loss of sense of security when encountering the unfamiliar at every turn. And even things like people smiled all the time at us. And initially we thought, oh, everyone's so friendly here and it's fantastic. And then after a while you thought, they can't always be happy. So then you started questioning what's going on, what does smiling mean here, and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
What was maybe the most confronting thing that you experienced when you first moved overseas?
I don't know, it's hard to say. I think having a lady working in our house was quite confronting because I didn't expect to lose my privacy. Our house is our castle in Australia, and losing privacy was quite hard. And also, I found managing the squat toilets with a sort of a kuta sawal with the trousers that are baggy and then holding up the other skirt, and then you had this scarf thing for modesty, and you're trying to keep it all off the floor, and it was really quite difficult. And helping your kids do that was also, challenging.
I feel like I've experienced a similar thing at the Melbourne Central toilets, but maybe a little bit different. Trying to keep everything off everything else.
Cutting it down with toilet paper, keeping yourself safe.
Yeah. So, Christine, obviously you have experienced culture shock yourself. So, and now you're spending time helping missionaries and people who are going on short-term mission trips in preparing for culture shock and dealing with culture shock. So what are some tips or tricks that you have or that you are helping people with when dealing with culture shock?
Cool. Well, I think because there's that sort of whole mud-like experience, wading through mud that people get to after that honeymoon bit where they're bouncing around, enjoying all the new things. It's helpful for them to have realistic expectations about what they're going to go through in terms of stages. So we talk about things like, we tell stories. So things like a surgeon colleague of ours in Tanzania that was about 50, and he came and his wife reported that every night he'd come home from work and eat his dinner and crash straight into bed. And she said he's very boring, and he was just so tired from all the differences he was encountering, all the ways people socially socially interact in different ways, and just even though he was still working as a surgeon, he was just finding it really tiring. He was very uncharacteristic behaviour. I did things like started suspecting the lady who worked in our house when something went missing, when actually it was just my kids had relocated it,
Yeah.
And you can become a bit negative towards people. My husband had a fairly extreme reaction, which he doesn't mind me sharing with you, and I share with the trainees. So it's a famous story. We lived next to a gate in the hospital compound, and we were on a steep sort of mountainous slope, and David thought it'd be good if we got a key to that gate so we could get out quicker, and noticed that other people were using it. So he asked the hospital director, who was North American, if he could have a key, and the guy said no, and he said he gave no reason. So David, being Australian, expected to be given a reason. So he asked the guy, "What's the reason?" And so he said, "Oh, for security reasons, I can't give you the key. You're pretty new." Anyway, David was really unhappy about that, and observed that the director was going through on his daily walk with his wife, and then the teacher was using it, and the midwife was using it, and various other people who didn't live right next to it were using it. So he thought it was a bit unjust, and started complaining and saying, they trust me to operate on people, but they won't trust me with a key.
Oh, that's so funny.
And anyway, and normally he's very kind of laid back character, David, and so I was a bit perplexed by this change, and after a while he started talking about maybe we could dig a tunnel under the wall of the compound to get a quick exit, and this is during the Maoist insurgency, so it wouldn't have been a good idea. So but yeah, anyway, it was just funny how a very rational, placid character lost perspective about something. It was annoying, but not that annoying.
Yeah.
So they were just sort of some of the things. So we try and raise awareness of some of the typical kind of behaviours you might see. Right. So people don't freak out when their husband starts behaving differently and they start behaving differently, their children start behaving differently.
Yeah. So setting expectations is obviously a big one. Are there any tips or tricks in managing it yourself personally, knowing what to expect or preparing yourself for that?
Yeah. So I think we talk about the Fisher transition curve, and that has this sort of peak, which is the honeymoon period, where you bounce around enjoying everything, and then coming down into a withdrawal stage where you typically will want to withdraw, and then getting into the deep trough where you're typically angry about things, before you then start to adjust and fit into the culture that you're going to. So there's various things we really plug in terms of positively doing to help alleviate this culture shock. And that is, one of the keys is a positive relationship with God. So a positive time that you have each day with God provides a lot of resilience and helps people's well-being generally, and particularly helpful in culture shock. Also just thankfulness as a habit. So we encourage people to practically put in thankfulness habits. So you might thank God for 10 things before you get out of bed in the morning. That's a really good one if you've got gastro. and you're feeling rubbish.
We'll remember that next
And
time we do.
From 4 years ago, 4 years ago, I was lying in bed with gastro in Nepal, and I thought, thankfulness, really, I need to get some perspective. And this is where the habit becomes really important. 10 things that God's given me today that I can thank him for. So that kind of thing is really helpful. I think having a strong purpose, so we select missionaries who have a sense of calling or a strong sense of purpose in going. They feel God wants that, they believe God wants them to go and he's with them, and so that's really important as well.
Right. That,
I think social connections are really important.
Yeah.
So we have set up a pastoral care friend relationship for each missionary, they set it up, and that person will ring them up every month or so and be asking them how's your time with God going, to encourage them to keep that relationship with God strong, but also asking them how they're going with finding prayer partners, how they're going with joining a home group, going to church, and all the things that will be assisting them to adjust to this new place. And so that's another key one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other ones. It depends on how many you want me to tell you.
No, I think what I wanted to pull on was when you did mention that transition curve and you talked about the honeymoon phase. And I think I can see that in a lot of my friends or even family and church members with the coronavirus. So I think my honeymoon phase has definitely been the dropping prices of petrol, going down to about 78 cents and, being able to sleep in all the way till 8:59 and then jumping on a Zoom meeting for work. And I guess that's kind of... for me, that's just really what just stands out. And so if you wanted to, I guess, continue with some of the tips and tricks, but explain a bit in deeper how that transition works from, honeymoon, denial, and then eventually, I guess, to acceptance.
Yeah. So, I think that it just takes time. And I mean, I've observed, like you, that people have the honeymoon phase, and I think it's helpful to understand that in yourself, that you become more and more tired as time goes on. So tiredness is a really key symptom of culture shock. So initially I bounced around organising WhatsApp groups with my neighbours and, chats with the neighbours and Zoom meetings for home group and Zoom meetings with friends and Zoom meetings with, everyone under the sun, all my usual connections. And then after a while, I started getting a bit tired and like, why did I commit to all these extra things? Yeah. So that's a sort of a typical thing to do, that you get tired and then you actually want to withdraw a bit, even though, so in the honeymoon period, you're just very enthusiastic, say you'll do all these things and then you're kind of regretting. Yeah. And then I think as you... if you have a pastoral care friend who checks up on you, or you yourself are checking up and realising, I'm withdrawing, I need to keep enough social connections going, you might reduce them a little bit, but you'd want to keep plugging away at going to church, at home group, at friendships, those kinds of things. And the other tips we give people, which is things like being creative and doing self-care, and for me, it's hopping on my bike after work every day to ride down the Mary Creek, that kind of thing. You kind of keep those things going.
For me, it's been baking sourdough like every other 20-something-year-old. I think I have spoken about sourdough every episode so far.
You really have.
So.
Don't worry, I've made 3 apple crumbles in 1 week. It was really good.
So,
yeah.
Christine, we obviously have our own coping mechanisms. You've mentioned a few times that one of the recommendations that you give to missionaries is that they spend time in social connections at church with other people. Obviously, we're pretty limited in this time. Hopefully, things will ease at some point, but we're obviously limited in that space. So, what are some other areas that might help in that way? I know for me, I really want to see my friends, but the thought of seeing them on a Zoom call just makes me feel a bit ill at this point. So are there any any other ways that we can deal with culture shock well?
Yeah, well, I think that in the social connections area, we can organise things with our neighbours, which is something I did early on, because you can actually talk to them legally, um, even with the restrictions. So that was a good thing to do, and working out ways of still seeing friends. Like I organised to go on a bike ride with a girlfriend a few times a week, and you can swing past her house, pick her up, and chat while you're riding at a social distance. And I think also just talking on the phone, because I don't want to use the screen anymore. I'm sick of the screen, so I'll just ring up a friend and have a chat on the telephone, which is much less tiring.
I've kind of forgotten that phone calls still exist.
Yeah.
Everything has turned into a video call now.
That's our only option
I
now.
know. Well, yeah. But it's good to not do video. I find not doing video a lot less tiring. So that's some of the things. The general self-care issues that we talked about, I just mentioned briefly. Creating a bit of a bubble of security we talk about for missionaries. So keeping a few habits that you can keep on in the new culture is really helpful. So I'm trying to keep, home group the same time, and try and keep, quite a few things that you can keep going. And so that's also very helpful. I'm just wondering about other ones.
Would the same thing go for having a routine? Because I have heard that having the same thing throughout the day also just helps you to stay mentally clicked on.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, keeping that routine, the routines you can have going is really helpful. So cool.
So Christine, one opportunity I guess we have as people dealing with our own version of culture shock is, I'm sure this can help give us a little bit more of an insight into what it's like to be a missionary and enter into a new space. We're all experiencing culture shock at this point. So I wonder if you could speak to any links or ways that us as young people could learn a little bit more about the missionary experience through our own version of culture shock that these missionaries are experiencing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people are experiencing, everyone's experiencing culture shock, and that experience is enabling people to understand better what it's like for missionaries to go overseas, what it's like for them to come back when they return to Australia and they've changed and they find Australia different to what they left behind, and they also don't fit as well. So it helps us to empathise and understand better. I think it also, even though it's not as extreme, this kind of culture shock we're going through at the moment isn't as extreme as missionaries go through, but it still gives us a taste of that. And I think also it helps us understand what it's like for refugees coming here, what it's like for immigrants, new immigrants who've come. So I think it can be quite useful for us in building compassion and understanding, and helps us show more grace to people who are different. Yeah.
And I guess for young adults, what would you suggest as some final tips for them specifically that could help them overcome, as well, just what you mentioned, not only the culture shock that we go into, but then the culture shock of Australia turning back to some sense of normality, which we don't even know what that's really going to look like yet.
Yeah, really good point. Well, I mean, everyone's been thrust into this unexpectedly, have been thrust into this COVID culture shock experience. And so having, we have to work, just like missionaries, I think we have to work on looking after our spiritual health. We have to look after our relational health, through social connections, on our physical and emotional health as well. And just like for missionaries, we need that positive relationship time with God. So prioritising that's important. It's easy to for it to drop off when we're tired. I've started doing a Read the Bible in a Year app, to read a bit more scripture than usual with that extra loss of commuter time, which is I found really helpful. You can do things like sorry, I'm having a blank. Thanking God.
Yeah.
Thanking God for 10 things before you get out of bed, or doing a journal at night's another way of doing it if you like writing them down. 10 things you can thank God for each day, and whatever number you want to do. I think also just having a purpose like missionaries do, a sense of purpose is really helpful in surviving culture shock. So thinking about what purpose you have in serving Jesus each day and just generally is important. Like I said, the social connections, we've mentioned that a fair bit. Maintaining those is good and important. That being creative, like your sourdough. For me, I've been doing a lot of baking. Some people are doing things like painting, playing music, learning the piano after 10 years or something like that. All those kinds of things are helpful. And having Sabbaths and resting as well, having those sort of healthy habits is good. But probably the one that we've talked a bit about already is realistic expectations is really helpful. That realizing that we will be about 70% capacity in our work, I think research shows, during culture shock. So we won't be as productive as usual, and we might be a bit grumpy or a bit tired or a bit withdrawn, and so we can be kinder to ourselves and more gracious to other people if we know that is quite part of the stage of going through this transition into this new culture of COVID. So I think it just helps us that understanding that and having those kind of realistic expectations. And the other thing that I think's not really occurred to many of us, except you mentioned it, Matilda, so it's obviously occurred to you.
Come on.
That in re-entry, missionaries typically find that a lot harder culture shock than going overseas. So that re-entry refers to when they return home after a period of time working overseas, and it is typically much harder than the first transition overseas, because I think people don't expect it to be that hard, because you're returning home, aren't you? Like it should be easy, but it's not, because it's changed. And I think that a lot of people are saying that our society is going to have changed because of COVID. We don't know how much. We don't know quite how long until we're back to normal, whatever normal is going to be. So we don't know how long we're in this phase for, and we don't know what it's going to be like. So I think it's good to realise that it might feel a bit like wading through mud again when we get out the other end, because we're then trying to adjust to the new normal.
It sounds like it's going to be a long time of learning different culture and processing change and working through change, which is going to be a really interesting challenge for all of us as we navigate that situation. I think the thing that I've been trying to come to terms with, which you mentioned, is that there's not really going to be a returning back to normal. There's going to be a new normal, and that's going to look different. I don't know if the handshake will ever be the same again after this pandemic. Right. So I think that's a really I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and I've thought just even relationships are probably going to be changed. And I was talking to someone about that the other day, that some people are going to be more anxious about COVID than others. So even though the restrictions are lifting now, some of my friends want to get together ASAP, and other particularly older family members are a bit more cautious. Do we want to? Not sure. And how long that behaviour is going to go on for, I don't know. So, that those kinds of things will be impacted by the new normal, I think.
Yeah, definitely relate to your friends wanting to get together ASAP. Definitely have a house party this Saturday.
Well, as Dan says,
right.
just because you can doesn't mean you should, Matilda.
No, whatever.
Well, Christine, thank you so much. I think you've given us a lot to think about and a lot to explore, and I really love that the different ways that we can learn about mission in this experience too. I think there's so many ways where God is using this situation for His glory and for His goodness, and I'm really encouraged that one of them is we have a little window of insight into what it might be to move overseas and experience a different culture. And we've been able to experience that on our own doorstep, which is really interesting. So, Christine, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really great to chat to you. And I'm excited to keep thinking about these ideas. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Until next time.
Cool. See you, Christine.
See you later. Good on you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Where can I run from your presence? Where can I flee from you? Even if I lie on the lowest valley, you will find me there. And deeper in shadows where I fade away from you, even if I fall into deepest darkness, love surrounds me still, and even if I fall into deepest darkness, love surrounds me still. And deeper than any ocean, your love goes on and on and on and on. And higher than any mountain, your love goes on and on and on and on and on. And deeper than any ocean, your love goes on and on and on and on. And higher than any mountain, your love goes on and on and on and on and on. And there is no ending to your love that holds on and won't let go, love that won't leave me on my own. I'm falling deeper into love that holds on and won't let go, love that won't leave me on my own. There is
So Tilly, what stood out to you when we were chatting to Christine?
I think my favorite thing that she mentioned was how we are at 70% capacity when we're going through culture shock. And I guess that was such a relief to hear, because you do feel more sluggish at home and everything's different, and we aren't working, like we're trying to work as hard as we always have, but reality is we just can't. And it just allowed me to have so much more grace over myself, because I think I've been getting really frustrated at the lack of capacity, because you notice it. Your to-do list is a lot shorter. You get more tired frequently. Everything is just that much harder. You're constantly wary. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a real statistic. That's science. You can't debate science. So for me, I was like, thank God that that's actually out there. And it helps you also, I think, have grace for other people. So others that you're working with or serving beside, it's like, actually, we're all about 30% less than we used to be. And we all need to have grace for ourselves. So don't get like frustrated towards our own inabilities, but then also towards each other. Remember that we do need to treat each other brothers and sisters in Christ. So with that grace and understanding that things are different. So it just gives us a lot more patience, I think, to work with. And then actually when she touched on re-entry and almost a different world, even though you're coming back home, it should be easier, but it's not. And it actually reminded me of, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but for about 5 to 6 months, I lived in Qatar. And that was, probably one of the best experiences of my life. And coming back to Australia was actually harder than going to that new country, because once I had left, there was no one to acknowledge that I actually was there. I felt very lonely, and the only people that remembered that experience with me was my family. And that's the only people I could talk about it with, because the people at home, they didn't care. Like, I made new friends, and they didn't ever hear of Doha or Qatar. Like, it was just so foreign to them.
They didn't share the same experience.
They didn't share it with me. And I felt so lonely that I had just gone through this entire experience and I wasn't able to reflect with anybody. And just hearing how that is what actually missionaries go through, and what we'll be probably going through when things settle, almost re-entry post-corona, that we might feel a bit frustrated or a little bit different because it doesn't go back to our expectation. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I think I was really struck by talking about the missionary perspective. I really think that, as I said before, I just think this is such a good opportunity to understand a little bit more into what it's like to be a missionary and to experience this thing. Obviously, like what we were talking about really helpfully explained what you've experienced. And I think it's explaining what missionaries are experiencing when they go in the field.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting that Christine said that often the returning back home is harder than the first experience of culture shock. So I'm just really interested to see what happens. But I think Christine's given us some really good tools of what we can do to help ease the pressure and know what to expect. And I think if we're planning to expect a little bit of culture shock, especially when we go back to normal life, I think we're going to be hopefully well equipped. Just keep investing in our relationship with God, keep spending time with our friends, get back into community quickly. One thing my church has been doing is a little campaign, for lack of a better phrase, for thinking of one person a week at church, and just messaging them and seeing how they're going. So I think the thing that I really want to make sure I do for re-entry is when we get back to normal life, making sure I'm checking in with the people that I used to check in with and hanging out with the people I used to hang out with.
Yeah, awesome. Well, right now we're actually going to throw to a little interview with one of our SIM group members. If you don't know what SIM is, it stands for Seriously Interested in Mission, and they are our young adult groups across Victoria that talk about what it does mean to be a missionary overseas, and run by our returned missionaries as well. And so we have Mel on the line, and we're going to just chat to her for a little bit.
Cool.
So welcome, Mel. Thanks for joining us. It's really good to have you here to chat on behalf of all our Sim Group members. So would you like to tell everyone in our audience a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in a Sim Group?
Yeah, sure thing. Hi guys, I'm Mel. I actually just started working in administration for CMS 2 months ago, before which I'd been working in a technical sales role for a couple of years. So I joined my first Sim group in 2017, so just after I finished uni. I happened to be dating someone at the time who was also a part of that group. He's now my husband. So that group was with yeah, so that group was with Karen and Rod, and it was just really good because we got to hear about their experiences and their challenges being missionaries, and kind of hearing their thoughts and discussing what's actually involved in mission, and even thinking through what the basics of what mission actually is. So now my husband and I have now joined a newly formed Sim group. We had our first meeting on Zoom the other week, which went really well despite it being over Zoom. And so that's really good. I think it's great to hear people's differing interests in cross-cultural mission and the different forms that they may take. And I think that's really helpful for exploring the possibilities of what mission might look like in our lives.
Cool. And Mel, what's been one of the most encouraging things being part of a Sim group so far?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of one particular time at Rod and Karen's group where we had a visit from a missionary family, who I won't name, but I just remember being really excited, really encouraged by their excitement and their joy in serving God where they are. And they were also excited when they found out that I speak Russian, because there were Russian-speaking people at their location. So that was a really cool connection. I think that was encouraging for me because I guess at this stage anyway, I don't have the feeling of being called to a particular location or people group like other people I know do. So that's encouraging to think that God might use something like my heritage in really great ways that I didn't plan or expect at all. I guess I used to fall into the trap of thinking that cross-cultural mission was something that was reserved for like the super Christians, and that they were in like a category above me. Yeah. So I think that Sims helped me recognize that, cross-cultural mission is something that everyone can consider and maybe should consider.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thanks. I was super encouraged hearing how you were super encouraged in one of our Sim groups. More than anything, I guess we can have a great plug-in if you want to meet someone and get married. Come along to our Sim groups. Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to leave it there. And thanks again. Enjoy your day.
Cool. Thanks Mel.
You
See
too,
ya.
guys.
Thanks for tuning in to the Young Adult Collective podcast.
You can find other episodes of our podcast and stay up to date by following us on Facebook or Instagram by searching the Young Adult Collective. Our podcast is also available on all major podcasting platforms as well as on YouTube.
If you would like to find out more about anything that we have mentioned throughout the show, we will leave our email in the description.
But until next time, thanks so much for watching.